Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's start a whole new series here based on your suggestions. Again, my apologies for the delay. The last time I did one of these was around 6 months ago, so thank you so much for your patience. As always, I'm going to go into some new suggestions and then also some back suggestions as well. This one has to do with an interesting case with the fact that these aliens and what was encountered is pretty standard, but what they took afterward, it definitely stood out. It made one wonder exactly why they took this very specific material that you and I just consider to be just a throwaway object, but to these aliens, it seems to be like a very, very cherished item. So I'll talk about that more in a minute. But it has to do with this. It's an encounter from 1947 to be specific, and it's known as the Villa Santina case. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the information associated with this very unique encounter. So what was this Villa Santina case, this 1947 case, or other times it was referred to as the 1947 Villa Santina Encounter? Well, it had to do with an encounter that happened again 1947, August 14th, to be specific, near a place called the Ravio Carnic Alps, which you're looking at a picture of here. You have to travel to Italy, very specifically, to see this location. It looks beautiful. It looks like one of those picturesque, perfect backgrounds that you would see whenever you travel to far off distant places that lots of people go, and then of course end up doing like great Instagram moments or just great all around moments to try to see nature at its finest. Well, this encounter only happened to one person, a guy by the name of R.L. Johannes, who I believe was a geologist at the time. And this is what happened to him. I tried to see if I could find a picture of him, but it looks like no, it's just lost in time when it comes to any whereabouts of a photo associated with him. But in any case, here's what happened to him. So it seems like there he was back on that time in the Alps just doing his job when, interestingly enough, he either was coming back from, I guess, collection of rocks or study of rocks or whatever he was doing, or going to one of those places when he came across this. He described it as a 10-meter wide lens, something involving like a weird metal design, almost reddish on it. And what was interesting was that it was placed into a crack of a rock. So imagine like a giant crevice or something else like that's an opening within a rock itself that this thing was wedged between, almost like it was using it as a way to keep itself standing is probably the closest thing I was imagining when I was reading this information. But whatever this thing was, there it was just out of the blue, right in front of him, and he went on to further describe that there was this weird thin antenna, almost like a car radio's antenna, coming out from one of the areas on top of this metal object. I don't know if he necessarily immediately thought it's a UFO, because otherwise it seems like this guy, R.L. Johannes, had never heard of UFOs before. We got to remember the date, 1947. This was probably a time period where this was either the very beginning of in this case before the wide opening of UFO cases, or it was just before that even of itself. So in this case, he didn't really see anything that stood out to him that was instantly just giving him alerts. But what he also saw were these two things. So you're looking at him now. He thought they were actually two boys that were located about 50 meters away. To them, he looked like boys because they were a little over 3 feet tall. They had these blue overalls that looked like some kind of weird, almost translucent material. And then the rest of their clothing also just stood out. I mean, it was very colorful. They had these bright red belts. They had these collars also with them, some cuffs or makeshift cuffs. Very much so, like if you would imagine a person or a child or anyone dressing up as an alien, but almost like using like a cheap budget size dress up, then you have something like that looks like this. Probably their most standoffish or the most outstanding thing that they wore, at least on their body, was this tight-fitting cap that almost looked like a helmet. So this was definitely something that he thought, again, there were nothing but two boys that were 50 meters away. But once he got even closer, then he saw, of course, that they were nothing of the sort, because he saw specifically on their faces they had these yellow green eyes with these pupils that were vertically slit. So just like when I was reading this information, it reminded me of that famous scene from Men in Black when, at the beginning, Will Smith's character encounters an alien for the first time, and you see the pupils with the vertical slit closed and open. That's what it reminded me of here. Obviously, when this guy, in this case R.L. Johannes, saw all of this, this must have freaked him out too. And their skin, another telltale sign, what it was a dullish green color. So all of that, of course, all of a sudden made him realize he's not dealing, in this case, with two little boys. He's dealing with something else completely different. Those aliens turned, and it seemed like they were either walking towards him or away him, because it was enough for him to be able to tell that they walked weirdly. They walked almost like, as he described it, robots. By the way, when I was reading all this information, it reminded me of something that I've noticed in some of the other videos I've talked about too. The way these aliens look, their design, their clothing, their skin, even their eyes, it almost matches like the weird sci-fi time period back then, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. There was a very strict concept of how people interpreted extraterrestrials, like low budget type stuff, the kind you would see late at night in black and white with a very, very, very low budget and as much as you can do with that. And so it reminded me of that again, because here's yet another encounter. Instead of running into like aliens that look like they come from Pandora, from the Avatar movies, or any other type of aliens, even from like the Prometheus films. No, in this case, they look like they would be tied into that era. So people's conception of extraterrestrials, of aliens, of UFOs during that time period somehow matches the very same aliens that they see there wherever they come about. So interesting enough that I'm running into this pattern yet again. But anyways, back to this encounter. So the way they were walking, it reminded him of looking like a robot, and then finally he just snapped out of it. He tried to see if he could I guess get their attention or see if he could find out more about them, because he actually called out to them. It seemed like he had enough bravado to do so. And at this point, the aliens either didn't want to do anything, or they've had enough of having this intruder within their location. He was using his pick. Remember, he was a geologist, so he had one of those picks that's used to try to tear apart small rocks, and he was using it to try to wave to them. They must have interpreted it something else, because one of those aliens raised his hand over his belt. I guess he hovered his hand over it. There was this very small puff of smoke, very thin puff of smoke that came out from his belt. And then the next thing this guy knew, this R.L. Johannes, he was on the ground, paralyzed. The way he described it was almost like an electric shock, like something pinged him from far away, and he was down on the ground. Like that was it, just completely paralyzed, nothing else he could do. And if that wasn't enough, then in this case, the two aliens, one of them at least, went over, and interestingly enough, instead of doing anything to him directly, this is where it ties in to earlier about the material I was talking about. Remember at the beginning of the video, I was mentioning how this is a unique case, and the fact that these aliens apparently hold something very, very special. Aluminum, because here's what happened next. This alien took up the pick from him and apparently got a bunch of other stuff from within his backpack, all aluminum related. Remember, this Arl Johannes could do nothing of this to stop this, because he was completely paralyzed. All he could do was watch, but it was enough for him to see that this alien's hands had at least 8 fingers. So it seemed like it was 4 fingers on each side of the hand. So lots of appendages and other than for to use with whatever they were flying with inside the ship. But there he was, completely not able to do anything, just completely controlled by whatever he was hit with. And when he saw that they slowly walked back to the saucer, they did this, of course, at their own pace with the same robot-like walk that he saw before. And then he saw them go into, in this case, the vertically slanted object, that metal one that I was mentioning earlier was wedged between the rocks, and then it shot up. It ended up actually tipping over a little bit. Maybe it was trying to get loose. Maybe it was trying to get outside of the wedge. But either way, once it did so, it took off with a huge blast of wind. It was enough actually, after about 15 minutes, for this guy to be blown back, and he ended up falling into a nearby riverbed. And then afterward, it took about 2 hours, he estimated, for this whatever he was hit with that paralyzed him, this sensation to drop off, and then that was it. He was able to get up and then slowly walk home. It was only afterward, though, when he was examining his backpack, that he noticed nothing was out of the ordinary except for one thing. Everything that was in there that was aluminum related was gone. Remember, I was mentioning earlier how this alien seemed to be ransacking through his backpack. Well, it definitely got some items. Remember, it took his pick, and then it also took everything aluminum related. So why, in this case, why would they do so? Is it because it's a cherished item? Is it because it's something that's completely rare wherever they come from? Is it something that they feel they must have to survive? No one knows. It just remains as mysterious as when he saw all of this. Everything else was probably in there left that could have been valuable. Aluminum is practically nothing in terms of its worth. He probably had some more valuable items to us, what we consider valuable within it, but to the aliens, they didn't care. They just simply took everything aluminum related, and that was the last he heard of him. Apparently the last of that area too, as far as any encounters, because there doesn't seem to be any other ones after that 1947 date. Otherwise, this thing was chronicled within a magazine known as the Flying Saucer Review, specifically volume 13, number 1, which you're looking at a picture of here. This was, I think it was 1967 or so a little bit after this encounter, but it was the first mention of everything happening here. I don't know if this guy, Johannes, was able to talk to them about it, or maybe he told others, and then they in turn became word of mouth and it got to this magazine. Whatever is the case, that was the very first encounter, the very first telling of this encounter, and then it just grew from there. But otherwise, again, hallmark in this case of this encounter being it's one of the earliest ones. It has to do with encounter, I think, of the fourth kind. Is that it? Whenever you have an actual presence or an encounter with specific aliens, and then whatever they did with that aluminum, they definitely consider it to be cherished. That's another thing that stood out. But if anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, please post those comments below. Anybody been by that area, by the way? Wherever those Alps are there in Italy, the Revel-Carnic Alps, they look beautiful. So if anybody has gone there and noticed anything unique or different, that'd be really, really good to hear too. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always, and be on the lookout too for more videos throughout the next week too. All right, everybody. Take care.